Often when you buy a Yamaha SY77 second hand, you want to know what's wrong with it. Now, I've done a series of videos on this machine and I know what's wrong with this one, but if you don't know what's wrong with it, then you might want to run the diagnostic mode. So getting into diagnostic mode is really easy. To do that, you press the voice key, you press the D key, and you press the 8 key. You will see the screen change and it will say SY77 test version 1.02 from 1990, April 1990 in both instances on the sequencer ROM and the main ROM. Remember, like, comment, subscribe to the channel. Go over to Instagram and follow me there. Go over to Facebook, follow me there. That's where the normal notices are. And consider becoming a Patreon. When you get into system test mode, there are 4 options. There's an option called auto, which I'll come on to in a minute. There's an option called manual. There's an option called copy. Now, if you've gone through a factory reset, that's how you do the factory reset, using that button there at this point in the process. And there's an option called exit, which takes you out of diagnostic mode, effectively reboots the synthesizer back to internal A1. Now, my experience is, and I'm going to go into manual, which is the +1 or yes key here, is that when you get to, if I use the encoder, because you can't use the up and down keys, it doesn't work on this keyboard like it does on the 99. You can use the up and down keys, but on this you have to use the encoder. But if you get to tests 6 and 7, and it's exactly the same on the 99 actually, it does exactly the same, and I don't know why, but the diagnostic test effectively freezes at 6 and 7. And the only way I've been able to get out of that is actually to switch the synth off and switch the synth back on and then go back into diagnostic mode. But the LCD screen works perfectly, the contrast works perfectly, all the dots seem to work perfectly. I don't seem to have any dropout at all on the LCD screen, so I don't know what that's telling me, but as I said, everything seems to work perfectly. And when I was in this synth recently, I did have a good look around all the connections and they seem fine. It does not look like anyone has been in there buggering about with it. Hell. Anyway, there are some important tests in here and I'm just going to run through those important tests. The first set of important tests are the first 5 on the screen here, and I'm just going to run through those. So the first one is the ROM check, that's checking the internal ROM. Second one is testing the RAM on the system, so that's where you write songs and tones to. Third one is all about the sequencer ROM, and the fourth one is all about the sequencer RAM. Obviously that's where the sequencer data is held. And the last one is the battery. Now, if I press that, it should come back at 3.1 volts, which is what I expect it to be because I changed the battery recently. So 3.1, 3.2 volts is really what you want. It always comes back at 3.1 volts, even though you've put a battery in it that's giving out 3.2 volts. Don't know about that. If you see about 2.8 volts, you know you've got to change the battery. So moving on. Other tests in here. The LED check. This is quite a good one because this will test whether all the LEDs are working, and it tells you which LED it's checking. So if I run that, it will first run through all the reds, and there are actually more reds on the keyboard than greens, by the way. Like so. Then it flashes them all, and then it runs through all the greens. And then it'll flash all the greens, and then it repeats the cycle. Now I don't want it to repeat the cycle, so I'm going to exit at that point. Then we've got the panel switch test, which is this one here, which if I go into, this will tell you whether any of the attack switches are broken. And it will tell you which buttons to press, so it starts with voice, and it basically works from left to right on the keyboard: multi, song, pattern, utility, edit, copy, etc, etc. I'm not going to go all the way through, and this is how when I first did this, when I first got this keyboard, and I thought, hang on a minute, the up and down keys aren't working. Well, I went through this test sequence, and the up and down keys are working, it just doesn't seem to be working in diagnostic mode. And I said, this is a change, because if you run this on the SY77, these two keys work perfectly in diagnostic mode. Anyway, it's a slight change. The next one down, hang on a minute, I've got to exit this and like that. The next one down tests the pitch bend, whether that runs through the full range that the keyboard is expecting. And then we go on to the next page. It talks about the modulation wheels 1 and 2. Then we look at the data entry coder. Then we look at this R encoder. And then you can press every key on the keyboard and it will make sure that they are all sending signals correctly. So you can pretty much test all the user interface on the keyboard from this diagnostic mode. Then we come on to the next piece, which is aftertouch. So that's making sure the aftertouch works. MIDI in, out and through. You will need a MIDI cable to test that, because you have to plug the MIDI cable into the various sockets to allow it to work. Then if you have a data card, you can test the data card by putting it into the data card slot. It will then check whether it recognises something's been inserted, whether it can read and write it, and whether it can memory protect it. It then does the next test after that, which is 22. Test the data card battery. Is it good or bad? Tells you whether the data on your data card is just about to expire, and you should replace the battery. Most people don't realise they need to replace the battery on the data card. So there you go. Then we repeat the card activities with the waveform card. In this case, it's really just limited to can it see it and can it read it, because you can't write to a waveform card. Then you have the disk read write and disk eject tests. So this is testing whether your disk is working, and you will need one of these, a floppy disk of the double-sided double density variety, or 720 kilobytes. And you put that in here and you select the test like so, and it will fire up the disk drive and start doing all the bits and bobs it needs to do. Takes a few seconds to run this through. Okay, this disk drive is happy, which is good because I've just put a new one in here. And then disk eject. Again, this just makes sure that the disk can be properly ejected. It's waiting, eject it. It says, what was it? Right, you've got to wait for it to tell you to eject. I was a bit premature there. So that tells you whether your disk drive is working. Then you can go through a series of controllers that you can attach to the keyboard. So you have the option to attach a breathe controller, a foot volume controller, a foot controller, a sustain switch, a foot switch, which all plug into these various sockets on the back here. I haven't got any plugged in, so it's pointless running a test on those. And then we get to, is this keyboard actually putting out sound? And quite often when you set a keyboard up and you're sitting there and you're pressing buttons and nothing's happening, you're trying to work out, is the keyboard actually outputting some sound? Well, there are a series of tests here that allow you to test that. So it sends 1 kilohertz to the right, 1 kilohertz to the left, 1 kilohertz to the left, 1 kilohertz to the right, and repeats that on output 1, and then it sends 1 kilohertz to output 2, and you can test all the outputs that way. And then you have a series of effects, so it's allowing you to test whether the effects are actually in line and sending out correctly. So there's some effects. Then it checks the PCM RAM. Then it checks the FM side of the synthesizer. Remember, this is has 2 engines on it. It has the AWM engine, which is using PCM as the basis of generation, and it has the FM engine, which is the Yamaha's traditional. Well, I say traditional, it's what Yamaha did with the DX7 that moved synthesis so far forward in the music industry. I'm not saying synthesis in general, but that's how digital synths evolved effectively. And then you've got a bunch of click highs, click lows, setting all the jacks to off so you get nothing. Then we have the factory reset, which you can bypass, which is test number 48 on this machine, but you bypass that effectively by doing the copy when you go into diagnostics, so you don't need to do that. You've got exit, and then we've got jump to card. And if you had a diagnostic card, you could put a diagnostic card in. That doesn't exist on the 99, by the way. So there you are. That's the diagnostic mode on the SY77. And to exit diagnostic mode, all you do is press exit. So you do, and you return to, as I say, internal A1. A very useful tool on the SY77, and if you get one of these, it's worthwhile going through that process. Now, what I would say is if you're going to run all those tests that I just literally went through, you probably need to give yourself about an hour, because it will take you that long to run through the tests, possibly repeat the tests, and understand what the diagnostics are telling you. And on that note, I'm going to say, live long and prosper. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.